Hello, I'm Lindsay Johnson, Fiscal Sponsorship and Communications Manager at Southeast Uplift. Thank you for joining us today. This is our fourth session in the 7-part House of Development webinar series presented by and in partnership with COGEO. This session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. You are welcome to have your camera on or off, whatever is most comfortable for you. We have enabled captions. If you have additional access needs, feel free to post those in the chat. We ask that you remain muted during the presentation and save questions for the end. We have reserved time for a brief Q&A. Our fourth session will be in a couple weeks on Wednesday, July 26th from 4 to 5 p.m. That will be focused on major gifts. Now I am going to hand the mic over to our presenter, Chelsi, to introduce herself.
Thank you, Lindsay. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining, and thanks for that introduction, Lindsay. So as Lindsay mentioned, I am Chelsi and I'm Director of Client Services at COGEO. And COGEO is a consulting agency based in Portland, Oregon, and we're dedicated to really the 501c3 sector and specialize in providing advice and direct support services to really help accelerate the development and fundraising growth of nonprofit organizations. Our focus primarily lies within the small and medium nonprofit space, because that's really where we found that we can have the most impact, make the greatest difference. And our goal is to really catalyze organizations with grand missions and visions, but they might just need a little boost to get to their full vision. So we have clients across the United States and collectively have over 40 years of experience in the fundraising sector. And throughout our work, we have successfully raised hundreds of millions of dollars for over 100 nonprofit organizations spanning across various sectors and states. All right. So now that you know a little bit more about us, let's dive into the session today. Okay. So again, we are in the fourth presentation of our 7-part webinar series on the House of Development. That's just a little roadmap of where we came from, where we're headed. And this is what I want to really focus on, which is corporations and foundations. And this is a diagram of the House of Development. So you may recognize this if you've joined or listened in on our past webinars. As a reminder, the House of Development is a tool created by COGEO to conceptualize the successful building blocks of a successful 501c3. And explain why development is so crucial in achieving fundraising goals. So it's really intended to be looked at from the bottom up. So at the garden pathway walkway here, you'll see communications, which includes things like PR, public relations, websites, social media, e-newsletters. And from there, you advance into the house, that first level, which we've discussed in previous sessions. It's annual and membership giving, as well as events. And now we have entered the first room of the second floor, which is corporations and foundations. So you can really think of the first floor as retail. So that's unrestricted giving typically. Second floor is non-retail, which usually includes restricted funding. So many corporations and foundation relationships really stem from what we've talked about previously, namely annual giving and events, which is why the House of Development is really intended to be looked at from the bottom up. It really builds on itself as you go up through the different levels of the house. And one notable exception, one downflow of that is you'll see corporations sponsoring an event. Otherwise, House of Development usually just works upward from PR communications into the retail level to more sophisticated approaches where decision-making isn't usually just one person in most instances, as we'll see with corporations and foundations. Usually it's a board or a group of people making funding decisions. Right. And with that, let's talk a little bit about our goals for the day. So first, we'll be understanding what foundation outreach and corporate engagement are, and how they add to both short-term success and long-term organizational sustainability. Second, we'll be learning why activity in both areas is fueled by the lower levels of the floor of House of Development, or the smart home, which is really just our term for the House of Development plus the use of technology interweaving throughout the home. So that's websites, CRMs, which are customer relationship management platforms, social media, email platforms. So smart home is just really our shorthand for House of Development plus technology. And in line with that, lastly, we'll get an understanding of the role of technology in corporate and foundation engagement strategy. All right, and our next slide here provides a breakdown of contributions by sources, which again may be familiar to those of you who joined or watched some of our past webinars. I've included this in past presentations because it's really helpful for context and understanding the ecosystem of giving. So 4 major sources of funding. First is individuals, which accounts for 67.4% of giving. Foundations are at 18.7%. Bequests come in at 9.5%, and corporations are the last tier. There you'll see 4.3% about. So from these numbers, you'll see that foundations are over 4 times more than corporations in terms of giving. So typically, you'll think of foundations as a bit of better use of time, essentially. So you want to make sure you're really focusing on foundation applications, but corporations can still be a really solid and funding source. So you don't want to discount them either, especially as we'll talk about in a little bit. If you have warm connections to a corporation or business that can provide sponsorships or funding, you'll want to really explore that. All right, so what types of foundations and corporations are of interest to you as an agency? So here's an outline of some different types of foundations and corporations to really help you understand that question and get some more context for some of our future slides. So under foundations, we have private non-operating foundations, which are the most common. So you'll see foundations like some local ones, for instance, Hoover Family Foundation, the Jackson Foundation. So those are the most common, most often that you'll see those. DAFs, which are donor advised funds. Those you'll generally see within community foundations. For instance, the Oregon Community Foundation has a lot of DAFs that make grants to various organizations based on maybe a family has some wealth and they set up a donor advised fund. So the community foundation can make grants on their behalf. Private operating foundations, those operate programs as well as awarding grants, which aren't super common, but you might come across those. A great way to approach them there is really understanding what the operating function is to really understand what their priority is. And last on the list of foundations is Community Foundation, which I mentioned. Oregon Community Foundation is a local example. Most every area has a local community foundation whose sole role is really just to support the 501c3 market in the area. And on the corporate side, there are really 4 types of corporations, but you can really break them down into 2 broad categories in terms of how you'll interact with them. The first is C corporations. So these are larger corporations, operationally, dividends are paid out to shareholders. And generally, outreach with them is more complex. So you can think of entities like Target or banks with Community Reinvestment Act that requires that a percentage of earnings have to be reinvested into the 501c3 markets. The healthcare industry, too, is under C corporations. So these really large entities are under that label. The rest typically are easier. You can just fold them kind of all into each other a little bit. Usually it's 1 or 2 individuals making the decision. Those are S corporations, LLCs or LLPs, and sole proprietorships. And we'll talk later about overall approaches for the most common types of foundations and corporations. But I wanted to give you that overview of types of both entities for context as we move into our future slides. All right, so next slide here covers types of contributions. So this, in general, there are other types, but these are the most common in our experience. I will preface all of that by saying, so there's going to be more you may come across, but wanted to highlight the most common that you are going to run across, at least at these early stages, potentially, of your fundraising and development journey. So under foundations, we have programmatic support. Generally, foundations are mutually exclusive in terms of how they operate in terms of support. So some foundations might support capacity, but they won't support programs. Program support is really just for projects and programs that you're operating. Capacity building or capital is potentially funding a facility build out, for instance. COGEO, for instance, we have a lot of soccer clients who are building out soccer fields or different types of facilities. So we'd go to a foundation that supports that type of larger scale projects. And then in-kind focus is on repurposing materials, for instance, food, especially in larger cities, partnering maybe with restaurants to salvage food. So those are really the three principal areas in terms of foundations. And moving into corporate foundation, corporations. This is really broader funding. So we have programmatic support, again, generally whatever their affinity is. So for instance, a medical center might provide funding for sports or health-related nonprofits. Capacity building really names getting their name on the 501c3 somehow, maybe putting their name on a building that they sponsored and supported in the building of. In-kind, again, this is a big one. They have typically a lot of capacity in terms of donating services and/or goods. So that's really critical to explore more in depth, because if you're doing any type of build out, you might be able to get building materials for the building or items for inside the building like tables, desks, anything like that. So you don't want to discount the massive potential in-kind donations have. Employee matching, this is another common one you may have likely seen that we'll talk about in more depth a little bit later in this presentation. Employee volunteers may have seen this as well. For instance, the entire Habitat for Humanity premise is based on this. And sponsorships, and the last one, I think we're all familiar with sponsorships, kind of the most common that you think of when you think of corporations. All right. So interestingly, both foundations and corporation, the engagement for both entities really follow the same steps in terms of engaging them tactically and finding the right synergies. So what are those 5 steps? First is research. So most foundations, this is mostly related to foundations because corporations, there'll be more about their relationships and it'll be more about the relationship building in terms of ROI, which is return on investment. So for foundations, really important to do research on them, find out their past grantees, giving history, and you can find that through internet and databases. There's a lot of different databases for foundation research. For instance, the foundation directory online is free at most libraries. You can also search through 990s on iris.gov or GuideStar. Another database is GrantStation. Another is Instrumental. So there's a lot. It'll just depend on what your budget allows for, what works best for you, depending on which platform you'll want to use. But a lot of resources there to look for foundation information. Second, you want to narrow down strategically by focus area and affinity. So you really want to make sure that you're bringing the right proposal that will show affinity for your organization for both foundation and corporations. Third, you want to have a final list of what you consider to be qualified foundation or corporate prospects. So what does that really entail? So for instance, if you're in a capital campaign, you'll want to really focus on corporations that can do in-kind and may have naming rights opportunities or interest in naming rights opportunities, as well as foundations that are known to support capital. On the other hand, if you're really focused on programmatic support, the focus is going to shift to sponsorships and foundations that support programming. So you want to know what you're really looking to make an ask of before you start engaging a foundation or corporation. Fourth, you're going to want to engage also high net worth individuals to really uncover possible existing personal connections within foundations and corporations. So this entails a bottom-up approach, going back to our House of Developments, going from the bottom, for instance, individuals that you've obtained contacts from individual annual giving or events, you can really develop and progress relationships with. And kind of build your community and network to really uncover potential relationships with corporations and foundations, which is a huge piece of this outreach and activities. Once you have conversations about, the person investing at a personal, individual level, you'll want to definitely follow up with them to explore potential connections that they might have to companies, foundations, and other high net worth individuals with affinity for your organization. So it goes beyond just the initial donation of the individual. You want to continue to engage them throughout the life of their interaction with your organization. And fifth step here, you want to leverage CRMs, again, customer relationship management platforms, and other lists to prioritize, strategize, engage individuals and companies on a continuous basis to really hopefully achieve those positive results. So this is tying back to technology and data capture. You want to make sure you have some sort of system for capturing data, tracking activity. All right, now diving into some best practices related specifically to foundations. First, you'll want to triangulate in through individual relationships. So as I mentioned, working with your community to get those warm connections. So you want to know your audience, their goals, and the pictures in their heads. And once you've identified the foundation where there are synergies, you'll want to get the list of the foundation's board of directors and any staff, and vet that list with anyone who's a VIP within your agency to help identify relationships. So again, triangulate, really make sure that you understand where the relationship is and what exists there so that you can essentially shepherd in the application that you're submitting. Next, you'll want to communicate in the language of metrics and impact. So this is more business oriented. They want to see and they want transparency too in governance, leadership, and program effectiveness. You'll want to make sure that you have a standardized way to measure year over year data of your impact, what you're doing in the community, as much as you can for as long as you can. So that's really, you're really able to show the impact you've had over a longitudinal set period. Next, again, going back to what I've talked about a little bit before, you want to research the 990 information. And 990s are required for some foundations to submit to the IRS, and has a lot of great information typically about past grantees, past grant amounts, and can't always find that in the 990s, but it's typically a really good source for obtaining some of that information to help you understand the application and what's achievable. Sometimes they'll also have the application policy if it's unsolicited or solicited, so invite only or non-invite, open-ended. Also has, again, previous grantee list and what levels they were awarded. Insights also into endowment investment strategies in terms of their corpus. So what they have in terms of what they can donate. And as I mentioned, you can also get a list of board members and key staff as well from the 990s typically. So thankfully too, a lot of this too can be on foundation websites, which is great. But if you want to do a deeper dive, you can pull the 990, or if the foundation doesn't have a website, you can pull the 990 to get some information that wouldn't be obtainable otherwise. And some additional best practices for foundation outreach. Program officers. So if there is if it's a larger foundation with program officers, you want to make sure that you're in touch with them. And that's really their job. It's really just to vet organizations. So give them a call if they have a relationship or if a relationship with a high net worth individual doesn't exist. Don't be shy about calling them. Again, it's their job. And what we found is they're usually more than happy to talk with us about organizations. It's their job. They love to do it. And it can really help shepherd in the application when a warm connection doesn't already exist. So before the call, you want to make sure that you do discovery first and have a goal or plan of action before making the call. So it can, again, really shift a cold application from cold to warm by stewarding the program officer. And be sure to really try to understand what they're like and how they want to interact with you to optimize the relationship. Sometimes you can find that out on the website. Again, sometimes they'll have a little description of themselves, or you can kind of pace yourself and really understand what they're like via email, initial email outreach, and some initial communication with them to understand if they're really data-driven or if they want to chat some. So kind of go by what you're picking up from them. So how to plan for a second in-depth discovery call. This will generally occur if they're interested in learning more about your organization. So you want to make sure that you do similar to what you've done before. Again, make sure that you have a goal and plan of action, know what you're going to talk about. And timing of stewardship pre and post application. If you think you're qualified, make sure that you're really active in terms of stewarding. Don't just kind of drop it once you've submitted. You want to make sure that you reach out to your contact, let them know it was submitted, thank them for their support, all of that. Next up here is site visits. So this can be a requirement to receive funding for some foundations. Some foundations want to actually visit where you're operating, if it makes sense, and take a look at your facility if you have one. So this is what we found really good practice is to have the executive director of your organization wait for the visitor in the parking lot and greet them there really enthusiastically, rather than just hiding away somewhere in the building. It really shows that you're excited and ready for them. And site visits we found can really make or break your standing with the foundation. So it's just because you get a site visit doesn't mean that, okay, the work is done. They're interested enough to come out and take a look. This is really a huge part of it. So you want to make sure that you put your best foot forward. And post-application grant award stewardship. So once you've been awarded a grant, stewarding it is really critical. The moves you're putting on individuals are going to be the same as the moves you put on foundations. So you want to make sure you set up typically quarterly stewardship for the foundation, unless they have some separate reporting guidelines that you'll want to follow. All right, so now let's talk about a couple of case studies to just put all this together in some real life examples. So first is the San Francisco Elite Academy. This is one of our past clients. It's a boys and girls club in San Francisco of elite players in the city. It was started in 2014, and right out of the gate, they were really committed to access in the socioeconomic realm. So they launched a really ambitious financial aid for membership fees, travel, equipment, other dues to really support players in need. And we helped them some years ago build out a development program from the ground up. So in this case, the foundation that we looked to in some of these initial stages was a connection that was the result of a cultivation event, actually, that the organization hosted. So for some context, cultivation events, talked about this a little bit previously in previous sessions on events, but cultivation events are a really great way to draw in new incremental donors. So essentially, for some context before I move on, the event consists of someone acting as a host. Usually it's maybe a parent, for instance, for a soccer organization, a parent, or maybe a board member with your organization. And they hold an event at their home or maybe another venue, maybe a restaurant, but nothing too fancy usually. It's about 1.5 hours of talking about the agency and the difference they're making in the community. And then you follow up with the attendees and talk with them more, and really informational. You don't make an ask during that particular event. It's just informational, helping get people into your organization and increase interest. So this is how San Francisco Elite was able to secure a Transformational Foundation Award via a donor. So we did a screening and found significant wealth among the parent base in the academy, which was no surprise just based on where they're located, San Francisco. And we had them host multiple cultivation events. And at one of them, a parent attended, and she had a family foundation that was committed to socioeconomic justice in the Bay Area. And after hearing the story of San Francisco Elite and the organization, how it started, she got really invested, really interested. We followed up with everyone who attended the event and had a personal meeting with her. She was, again, super interested in the financial aid program and invited us to bring a proposal to her family foundation. So the proposal we submitted at the time was $625,000 over 5 years. That was the full request. And in December of 2018, San Francisco Elite was awarded a $500,000 pledge over 5 years. So $100,000 a year. So a little less than we asked, but massive and hugely transformational for the organization at that time and where they were at. So again, warm connection really got us into the foundation and can show why it's so critical, and also shows the different layers of the house, why it's so important to really start at that base and build up. Events can be a way to bring in those larger major donors who can make a large donation as well as make some connections for you. So what was the post-grant stewardship? We provided reports of what 100,000 did over the last 12 months. And the ROI really demonstrated the foundation's investment and how it was truly making a difference. So that was, again, really just hyper-focused on how the funding was used and the impact it had. And because it was incremental revenue, they were able to really distribute the funds that would have gone, otherwise would have gone to the financial aid program to really improve their other programming areas, which was great. Okay, on to another example. So this is a current client. I think I've mentioned them in previous sessions as well, the Commons Law Center. And they are a legal service provider based in Portland, Oregon, of course. And they're revolutionizing access essentially to legal services for underserved populations. What they do is provide civil legal assistance to support those below 400% of the federal poverty level, really focusing on those who don't really make enough to afford legal, typical traditional legal services, but have too high an income to qualify for legal aid. So filling in that gap. So we've been working with them since about 2020. And as part of our process, we conducted and continue to conduct research and identification of foundation prospects on a regular basis. One of the recent prospects we identified was the Northwest Natural Philanthropy. And we identified the program area for the Commons that was most aligned, their tenant eviction defense program, and submitted a proposal highlighting the alignment with Northwest Natural. We were able to find some good information on Northwest Natural's website about their vision and values, which we actually used language directly from their value statement to tie it into what the Commons is doing to really make that alignment clear. And we recently heard back from them. They were really interested in learning more. We had a meeting with 3 of their program officers, and one was incidentally a close friend of the Commons' previous executive director. So having that connection really helped boost the Commons proposal. And it was really great conversation where they were able to share their vision with the Commons, talked about the synergy between the 2 organizations, and the Commons' efforts to really support low-income individuals in the community. So they made a commitment. This one is $5,000 for this initial year with a potential to bump that up in future years. It's really our foot in the door, which is great. So that was both monetary, $5,000, and in kind. So they also are providing potential other resources, services, outreach, as well as they have a conference room that we can use for events. So really good mashup and good potential partnership for future as we move forward and continue to steward it. Okay. And before I move on into this slide, I do want to note, I know many of you listening likely have smaller organizations or agencies that are just starting out and may not have the connections that San Francisco Elite did. So for you, you'll want to really start with gathering your own metrics and stories. So you're ready to start telling those stories when you do get a relationship. So this is where your donor and community intelligence comes in for tracking purposes. You need to really understand your community and what they're interested in to tell your story effectively. And if you don't have a community of donors, for instance, you may serve maybe a demographic that doesn't have or work for large companies or have connections to foundations. You'll want to start first by doing a strategic retreat to really understand your organization's priorities and goals. So a strategic retreat is essentially you take a few hours talking within your organization about doing essentially a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and really understanding the composition of your organization and where you're at currently. Then from there, you start doing research on what type of companies and foundations could be a good fit for you based on your goals and priorities. And on the corporate side, you target businesses that maybe smaller local ones. They don't have to be the large, targets, for instance, that I mentioned, Amazon. Smaller local are going to be your best bet, most likely, who have really committed interest in your local community. So again, this is what the Commons did and really started triangulation when they first started out with, for instance, law firms, local law firms, because of the obvious connections and relationship building potential. All right. So with that, now I want to shift over to the corporate side and corporate giving programs and corporate initiatives. So first, matching programs, I want to talk about a little bit. You should absolutely be aware of any companies where your donors work that may provide matching programs. So here's some statistics here, metrics. 65% of Fortune 500 companies provide matching gift programs. And there are lists easily found online. You can just search 501c3 corporate matching companies and pull up some comprehensive lists. Over 18 million people work for companies with matching gifts programs. 84% say they're more likely to donate if a match is offered, which is really significant. And 1 in 3 donors say they would give a larger gift if matching was applied to their donation. So matching programs clearly influence how donors think about their giving in a really positive way by encouraging donations, more donations and larger donations. So with that in mind, you want to really be active in terms of making sure you understand the synergies where your donors work, and if they have matching gift programs that you can bring to their intention and leverage. So don't assume donors know about their own matching gift programs. Companies don't necessarily broadcast it to their employees. So you want to make sure it's overt in your own messaging. For instance, if you're doing an email appeal, for instance, you can include language like, do you know that your company does a match of up to $2,000, or check out if your company does a gift match program and provide a link where they can do a search. Something to flag to their attention to take a look and look into it on their own, on their end, potentially. Some individuals just might not be thinking about it, but their company does a match that they're just not aware of. So you want to make sure you take some time to create that framework and messaging to make sure that you're informing your donor base through most of your communications. All right. So next up, let's talk a little bit about best practices for corporate engagement. First, you'll want to know the difference between sponsorships and donations. They're really two different transactions. So companies, they know how they want to operate. You just really need to give them the opportunities, and then they'll guide you in terms of what they want to do. So what you need to do on your end is just be ready to talk about any range from in-kind to direct donations for tax write-offs, especially relevant for C Corps who can benefit from tax write-offs. to a sponsorship if they have corporate marketing expenses and that makes sense for them. So what you do is, again, just provide the opportunities for them and go from there. Have some of those initial conversations and tailor your requests based on their feedback. Next, you want to limit research time unless the opportunity is targeted. So for example, we advise sports clients to really focus on healthcare industry because of the synergies there. Meals on Wheels, for instance, would focus on restaurants and grocery stores. So you want to think about this strategically. Look at where the synergies are based on your mission and what you do and the industries or sectors that line up. You don't want to just do a massive search for any company because that's not a great time saver or effective. Third, you want to engage through individual relationships, similar to what we talked about for foundations. They will communicate who they're trying to reach, the return on investment goals, and the language they want to use as a partner. And if no relationship exists, try marketing or communications to see if there's a community specialist position at the company. Chamber of Commerce is a great venue for identifying companies, for instance, and developing relationships because they have that membership. Another would be to set up speaking engagements like with Rotary groups and Lions clubs because they also have memberships and their members usually have ties to companies in the area. Again, here you want to avoid cold submissions. Online forums are essentially black holes. You submit and often you don't hear back. If that's your last resort, go for it. You never know, but you'll want to try to do your best to steward a warm application. Right, and last up here, ROI is key. So you want to make sure you can demonstrate that. Again, ROI is return on investment. So even if it's a soft return, their interest is invariably going to be bottom line and profit line. It's a company, they want to know. They want to see the return on their donation or in-kind donation and see where it's going. So some metrics include maybe how many people you have in your on your email list who would get exposed to the company if you were to market them, put their logo on your website, for instance. So what is the traffic like on your website? What are your demographics and are they appealing to the particular business? What is your social media following? To really show engagement and demographics and what your reach is. So again, tying back to the house of development, the lower levels of the house are foundation, and for these upper levels are corporation for corporate outreach. So if you're looking at sponsorship, for instance, or signage, you want to look at foot traffic for your facility and building. So again, lower levels of the house are building on this so that you can really show the metrics and demographics for these upper levels, foundation, corporate outreach, to show how many people are visiting your website. That all ties into communications and building on that. All right. Now let's dive into a couple of case studies to really illustrate some of these points again. So first is the Ecologic Development Fund, which I've also mentioned in some previous webinars. They're another one of our current clients. They are a US-based 501c3 that provides direct services and training for rural and indigenous communities in Central America and Mexico to really support sustainable livelihoods and stewardship of natural resources. So we've worked with them to formalize their corporate outreach procedures, and a big piece of that is in creating a corporate outreach deck to use in conversations with potential corporate donors. So here are a couple of slides from that deck. So here's one slide, another is on this next slide, but let's focus on this slide first. So this really gives you a visual of the best practices we discussed. So first, we have a slide for sponsorship packages, what the company would be receiving, for instance, in terms of certain giving levels. And you'll see here, you can have some fun with the tier names. For instance, we use terminology of rainforest systems given Ecologic's mission and work in Mesoamerica. So for package 1, for instance, we have red mangrove. We have the title banner placement of the company on Ecologics communications, 3 yearly exclusive Ecologic-wide email blasts, 8 yearly exclusive social media posts on all platforms, exclusive display on Ecologic website pages with the most traffic. So this is really like the top tier sponsorship package. And all this comes out to about 42,800,000 impressions, which is significant and really cool to see, and gives the company an idea of the return on investment and what they would be receiving in terms of marketing and exposure. And impressions, too, I'll note, is essentially just a marketing term for number of views on a particular piece of media. Okay. And second slide here. We also have some customizable options. It's really a breakdown of the items that Ecologic can provide, such as email communication, social media blasts, to really allow the company to customize their own preferred package based on their own budget and interests. So we like to provide some standard packages, but oftentimes we'll find companies have their own idea of what they want, and we'll create a customized deck for them following initial conversation and what we understand of what they're looking to achieve. Okay, so now let's dive into another case study here. This is with Empower Me Academy, another one of our current clients. Empower Me Academy is a San Francisco-based 501c3 that uses basketball to provide youth mentorship and really catalyze their development and leadership growth, both in terms of sports and academics and their personal lives. So starting in 2020, and I mentioned this during our event session, but starting in 2020, they hosted an annual basketball-thon event, which was rebranded recently in PowerFest. So it's a really fun event, a day of competition for the kids, some side events, good food, some food trucks as well. A great day for parents to just engage and have fun. So what we did for them for this event, we developed a specific event sponsorship deck with different sponsorship levels and in-kind sponsorship options. So the highest level sponsorship is the title sponsorship, coming in at 25,000, and at lower levels we have side event sponsorships at 10,000. So for instance, it would be, we got a donation, let's say from Foot Locker, it would be the Foot Locker Skills Challenge, or maybe the Skills Challenge catalyzed by Foot Locker. We'd put their name somehow, interweave it with the title of the event. And on the third page here, this last one that says itemized support, we have a list of options that would be things like signage, apparel, prizes. So those are in-kind donations. And what we can do is reach out to companies that maybe have potential connections. They can get us some of these items for low cost or free as a donation. So this is a really helpful and useful deck to use during introduction conversations with a company to present them with options. And then they can tailor, or they can decide what they like, and then we can tailor the deck further based on what they want to do. And EMA recently received a title sponsorship for the event from a tech company, which was cultivated through a personal relationship that EMA's CEO has with the tech company's founder. So again, another point in the favor of warm applications and finding those connections and utilizing them. All right, so last example before we move on. This is the Richmond Strikers, and they're a huge soccer club in Richmond, Virginia. And they have a relationship with Bond Secure, which is a large healthcare provider in the area. It's similar to what you've seen likely regionally, some of those larger healthcare providers, for instance, Providence here in Portland. So Bond Secure, their orthopedic division is on site anywhere where the Strikers have a large tournament or where a large number of players are competing. So it's a really deep relationship that they've built on and expanded over the years. It went from just purely monetary to that more active engagement of them tabling at tournaments and events. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we were looking into ways that we could integrate Breast Cancer Awareness Month, which is in October, with this partnership. So we approached them with an idea to equip all travel packages with, or all travel players, the package for each of them, the kits, with pink socks during home games in October and away games to raise awareness about the issue. And yeah, Bond Secure loved it. So here are some pictures of the result of that. So usually the colors, the Strikers colors, they're Halloween style, orange and black. So you'll see the pink socks really stand out. On the left is the jersey kit, and on the right is a photo of a tournament where you can really see the pink socks really popping. Okay, and on to our next slide here. With that, I want to walk through some digital and technology strategies that go hand in hand with foundation and corporate outreach to really develop what I've mentioned previously as our smart house of development. So first, you want to know your audience and what they value. You want to think about that to really tailor the messaging. Because a lot of this interaction is one-on-one connections, you can really narrow down your messaging even further in this case with foundations and corporations. So you want to think through what this person or board of people values to make your message really impactful. And once you've figured out what they care about, make sure that your own agency, you really know your own agency, and you're making sure that you're tying in what you do with what the person is interested in and what they value. So the key here is to really highlight what's in it for them to transact, and don't assume they're interested just because it's for a good cause. Unfortunately, a lot of companies, as we know, they're interested in the bottom line, what's in it for them. So you just need to make sure that you're messaging it in those terms and in the way that will make sense to them. You'll also want to be prepared to show and tell. They will want to see the proof of your impact. So that can include things like impact statistics and metrics, case studies, testimonials, any data you have around your impact in the community. And last key item here is to have a plan. So you'll want to show the person or people that you're talking with that you know what to do with the money that you may be given. So you want to have numbers here that can really back up and make sure that you're backing up what you're saying with numbers and metrics, and can show that your finances are solid, you know what to do with the money, and you can really utilize it and maximize it. Okay, and some more about technology and tools specifically. So now that you have some ideas, let's say you have ideas about how you're going to use the funding, but you're not sure how to show the impact for the purpose of discussing it with the funder, for instance, stewardship. So here are some tools and best practices. First is finance and reporting. So this will be the dashboard of money coming in and going out to really show that it's being used effectively and how it's being used. So some tools here, and there's a ton out there, but a few top tools: QuickBooks, which you may be familiar with, Salesforce, which I've mentioned before, CRM, as well as Blackbaud. Again, there's a ton, just wanted to give you some ideas, but you want to make sure that you have some sort of platform for tracking your finances to provide those reporting, important reporting metrics. You'll also want to make sure that you are tracking all of your contacts. You'll want to see who's interested in what content and what content is most effective, and really streamline the content to optimize it. So tools like HubSpot and Donor Perfect can really help with this. Alternatively, even just spreadsheets, Salesforce can be adapted. Really just making sure that you have a system and you're using it effectively and consistently. And last piece here is data collection and management. So I know the idea of data management platforms can be a little intimidating. If you're familiar with Salesforce, you might have a little familiarity, which is great. But if you're going into it with no knowledge, it can be a little scary to start with, but I'll just preface, don't be scared, dive into it. Salesforce, for instance, it's what we use for all our clients is our preferred platform because it's free for nonprofits and is really able to grow with your organization. And it has a ton of free guides and trailheads to really help you with its different functionalities. So it's easy to get some information on what to do and how to best use it. Alternatively too, again, you can just use Google Sheets if you don't have the capacity right now to engage or really get a platform going. Just use Google Sheets, spreadsheets. Again, just making sure that you have some sort of system for tracking data and activities and you're using it consistently. Okay, and last slide here is the key takeaway that I want to leave you with, which is what we say it's really about people moving people. So for the most part, you won't be getting random or cold donations from foundations or corporations, though it can happen on occasion. In the vast majority of cases, though, it's really about triangulating through relationships, making sure that you're connecting with people in your network who have access and influence in the community who can really help. So if you develop a relationship, really be sure to steward it and make sure that you're maximizing it as much as possible. So you can really steward in these warm relationships with foundations and corporations. So again, the ask doesn't stop with just the fundraising ask from a donor. You'll want to make sure that you are continuing to build that relationship with them so you can garner these connections. All right, so that concludes our lesson for the day. We have, I think, a few minutes left, so I want to open it up to questions if anyone would like to chime in, and we'll go from there. Okay. Okay, so, well, Lindsay, if you want to take it away.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, and thank you all for joining us. We'll get this posted online shortly, and I'll send out the link to everyone who is registered. We hope to see you all for our next session on Wednesday, July 26th at 4 p.m. That'll be our 5th session on major gifts, and have a wonderful evening.